Thank you, Steve, for your kind invitation to preach at your induction. We've traveled many roads, and it is beyond wonderful to see you and Rhonda and your family here tonight. What a journey it's been, eh? And thank you, Bishop John, for welcoming. We refer to ourselves as a group of us who all retired at the same time. We refer to ourselves as has-deans. So for welcoming this has-dean into this moment in the life of St. Hilda's. So I want to speak to you tonight about the role imagination plays in ministry. I want to talk about imagination. Human imagination is amongst the most important powers that we possess. Indeed, it's our capacity to imagine that makes so much of life possible. Imagination is central to the life of the Church, since much of what we proclaim is dependent on our ability to see the invisible. I mean, if you think about it, many of the values that the Church holds are not seen. Values like love and justice and kindness and compassion. You can see them in action when someone is being loving or just or kind or compassionate, but they don't exist in the way that a chair does or a tree or a building. Even and especially the key proclamation of the Church that there is a God refers to something not seen, except Christians believe for a very few years in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And we don't shy away from this in the life of the Church. Indeed, the central statement of the Church Catholic, the Nicene Creed, affirms that we believe in all things seen and unseen, or in the quaint language of the Book of Common Prayer, which in this case I prefer, we believe in all things visible and invisible. So when you're part of a body that believes in invisible things, you need to exercise your imagination. Tonight's as good a night as any to think about the imagination, because St. Bartholomew, whose feast day it is, about him next to nothing is known. Sure, there's some accounts of his travels to Turkey, Ethiopia, Armenia, maybe even India. Sure, he's one of the names of the 12 disciples listed in the New Testament. Sure, there are stories, some particularly gory stories, about his martyrdom. Sure, there's attributions of miracles, but most of these are the stuff of legends, not the hard facts of history. You see, imagination is kind of baked into the very nature of Christian believing. Engaging the imagination is the task of preachers as we seek to offer an alternative narrative into our consciousness. In some ways, it's what Jesus was doing in the appointed reading from the gospel this evening when he invited his disciples into a different way of thinking about what constitutes greatness. He inverts their worldview and he engages their imaginations when he says, "But not so with you. Rather, the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like one who serves." Over and over again in the Gospels, Jesus confronts the assumptions of his disciples by inviting them to imagine a different way of being in the world. Using rich images and telling stories, he engages imagination. And for those who let their imaginations be expanded, their worldview is forever changed. And the Church believes in this invisible power to this very day. And I think of the parish community as a laboratory where new possibilities of being human are imagined and then practiced, which brings us to tonight and this celebration. With Steve's arrival as your priest, there's a new beginning, and every new beginning is filled with imaginative possibilities. Now, you, the wardens and the leaders and members of this congregation, you have your own hopes and dreams as you imagine the future of St. Hilda's. And Steve certainly has his as he begins his first assignment as a rector, a parish priest. What I think is crucial in these first few months together is seeking to align the parish's vision and imagination and the priest's. And what this involves is listening to each other deeply, and in that process of listening, to discern how you're being called together for the good of the community by the grace of God. Steve, when I talked to him about tonight, he asked that this night not just be about him, but about the parish community as well, and he's right. I did a little poking around on your website, and I read a bit of your history. 85 years almost, if I did my math right, which I usually don't do, but that's about 85 years. The people of this place have been imaginative over the course of your history in myriad ways. From the founders of this place who had the foresight to build a congregation, which in its earliest days, because it was the only church in town, ministered to all who came, regardless of their denominational affiliation. I think that kind of set a tone. The early story of St. Hilda's, of openness. Over the years, this has been a place where the progressive stream of the church has been celebrated. From its affirmation of women and LGBTQ folks in ministry and leadership, to taking a leadership role in efforts for reconciliation with Indigenous people, to finding ways to put into practice good environmental stewardship. Long may St. Hilda's continue to be a beacon within this diocese for change. And long may the theological imagination flourish here. And with Steve as your priest, you have someone who has great enthusiasm and a vibrant imagination. I mean, come on. Here's a guy who traveled for a time with the Grateful Dead. And then he fell in love with Jesus and got disenchanted with the simplistic theology of an evangelical sect and came to explore the Anglican way. That's when we met. He went to seminary. He got so turned on by biblical studies that he pursued and earned a doctorate in that field. You will be inspired by how he will open biblical texts for you, moving beyond, and he's done this with me over and again, moving beyond what I imagine the text to be about, expanding it, and begin to understand in a deeper way the complex dynamics of an ancient world, but doesn't just leave it there. When Steve leads you in Bible studies, you see how that ancient world connects with our time right now. So as I think about this appointment, it seems to me that you have so much to offer each other as congregation and priest. As a parish, you will teach Steve about what this community values and stands for, and about what you want your priest to be and do. You've got a teaching role with him. I know you will welcome Steve and Rhonda and their family into the community of Sechelt and surround them with love and care. And as priest, Steve's going to offer you his enthusiasm, his insights, but most of all, his imagination about what might be here as you look into the future. In his beautiful book, Beauty, the Invisible Embrace, the late great Celtic philosopher John O'Donoghue describes how a new leader's imagination can help transform an organization. He writes, and I've edited it just a bit, frequently the imagination can bring completely new eyes to a situation as a person comes in and takes leadership. He refuses to inherit the bank of dead perception which preceded him, refusing the old descriptions. His fresh imagination enables him to see beyond the accepted frieze. When others begin to glimpse it, new possibilities awaken. That's what a new leader brings into a community, a fresh imagination. And that's my hope for this evening, that as you continue to get to know each other with Steve's fresh eyes and rich imagination, there's going to be new possibilities that will awaken here. And St. Hilda's will once again embrace its place in the household of the Church as a sign of the possibilities of inclusion and justice that show forth the love and mercy of God. And for that enterprise, the gift of the Holy Spirit, another invisible part of God, the gift of the Holy Spirit is what's needed. The invisible energy that we believe enlivens us all. As we let God's Spirit penetrate our imagination, we can be transformed and energized to be the instruments of God known and revealed in Jesus Christ. It's a poem by D.H. Lawrence that captures this most beautifully and succinctly, and I offer a portion of it to you tonight, both as a prayer and as a way to close this reflection. The poem is called The Song of a Man Who Has Come Through, and it goes like this. Not I, but the wind that blows through me. A fine wind is blowing the new direction of time. If only I let it bear me, carry me. If only it carry me. If only I am sensitive, subtle, oh, delicate, a winged gift. If only, most lovely of all, I yield myself and am borrowed by the fine, fine wind that takes its course through the chaos of the world.